Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Danes Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Roy Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Matt Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hello, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel, the number 47 player in my 50 most relevant list for 2020 is West Coast Eagles ruckman Nick Naitanui. I feel like every time I have a player that's had an ACL injury, I feel the need to bring in Benny Gogos. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very well, mate. This is another exciting guy. I mean, West Coast could have done with Nick Nat in 2019, but I think our fantasy sides might do very nicely with him at 2020 with a nice little discount.
Yeah, we talked about it a couple of days ago when it comes to the Adelaide Crow Tom Doedee, that, you know, while we never wish injury on anybody, just the 3 home and away games last year for Nick Nat does mean he's going to present some significant value for us. He's going to come in at just over $450,000 in Supercoach and almost identical pricing in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, right around that $470,000 price mark across all your formats. His highest score last year in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team was against the Magpies, an 82, while in Supercoach, 99 against the Hawks. His average last year, not that he's priced at that in any of the formats, he went at 72 in AFL Fantasy and 93 in Supercoach. I think when we, think about Nick Nat, look, over 200 centimetres, massive 110 kegs, hulking frame. He is one of the most dominant big men we've got. This aerial ability to take these huge contested pack marks. Just a dominant ruckman who just wins hit-outs at ease. And something, Ben, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, in depth later on in the episode, is he wins hit-outs comfortably against most ruckmen. It's not like he struggles against ruckmen, and sometimes we look at that with our ruck matchups. We look at the fixtures and go, oh, okay, he's got some difficult ones. With Nick Nat, I'm genuinely not concerned about him coming up against any ruckman going, he might have a bad score here because of the opposition. He's just so good in those hit-outs.
Well, that's the thing, especially when we're looking at the Supercoach scoring system. So he will rely on hit-outs to advantage. He'll rely on centre clearances. So looking through his numbers, it's a little bit surprising, actually. From 2016 to 2019, I think prior to that, hit-outs were a bit lower among ruckmen. But over those 3 seasons, he had averaged 34, 30, and then obviously just the 30 in 2019 across the 3 games. But what he does with those hit-outs is honestly a lot better than what a lot of other ruckmen do. So he might only get you 30 hit-outs, which, we're looking at someone like Max Gawn, who's really pushed that number up. Brodie Grundy's pushed that number up. But what he does with those hit-outs is sometimes phenomenal. So the way he plays his football is just so suited to the scoring system. He does so much of his work in contests, deep in congestion. He's so prolific in those tight in and under spaces. He's going to win. Going to, attain tackles. I mean, his best tackling season, four tackles in 2018 across 15 games. Like, he will do it all in space. He's not going to be prolific with uncontested work. He's never averaged more than 13 possessions in a season, but that's why he's just so dynamic in that Supercoach scoring system. And if you look at it from 2011, which was his 3rd season, he has not averaged below 90 in Supercoach. So that's a pretty phenomenal rate over a 9-year scoring period.
Yeah, look, it is decent. He really did break out in 2011 and 2012, which was, by the way, ruck sharing with Dean Cox at the time. 93.8 in Supercoach, 113.8 in Supercoach the following year, 2012. Had one of his best years, not his best AFL Fantasy and Dream Team year, but 86 that year. A little quieter for him, still averaging 90 plus in Supercoach in 13 and 14. And then it was 2015 when he took the sole ruck responsibility, and we started to see those scores kick back up across the formats pre-injuries. 2015, 88 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, 103 in Supercoach, 84 in 2016, and 105 in Supercoach. And he did battle a little bit of Achilles injuries in that 2016 season, but just as the Eagles were kind of pushing for a flag tilt, did his first of his ACL injuries against the Hawks in round 22. He, because of that, missed the entirety of the 2017 season. But in 2018, things were tracking genuinely okay. Coming back off ACLs, it's something we talked about just a few days ago with Tom Doedee, is how do guys come back? Well, for Nick Nat, a little bit down, but still solid. Pre-injury, 80 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, and 96.6. So we've got some data to know how does he come back off injuries. A little down, but still solid. If we were to take that injury-impacted game in 2018 out where he did his knee, 83 in AFL Fantasy and 100 in Supercoach. So he's tracking along okay for us, Benny, that when we see these guy coming back from multiple injuries, he's now done, in 2018 he injured the other knee, so it's certainly not the same one, is we see a guy that even coming back off ACLs, he can score way better than he's currently priced at for us.
Yeah, for sure. That is really positive in the sense that we have actually seen him come back from one of these in the past. The negative is that he's done one in the past, and we're looking now at 18 of a possible 66 home and away games over the past 3 seasons, which of course is the major negative with him. But look, honestly, as I alluded to earlier and as you've been talking about throughout, his scoring has never been in doubt. Especially in Supercoach, you kind of know what you're going to get. Body-wise, we don't know what we're going to get exactly. But look, we know with this guy that if he plays, if he's on the park, he scores fantasy football points. So, I mean, even in Dream Team, that 2015 season, he averaged 88, and that was with a monster back half of the season. He had produced, I think, some 5 of his last 9 scores in Dream Team that season. 5 of his last 7 actual scores in Dream Team of the home and away season were 100. So he's quite capable in that scoring format as well. Of course, he's always been much better suited to Supercoach. But look, if he's out there on the park, MJ, he's going to be scoring points, mate.
Yeah, and that's the key thing. And I do want to talk about his durability in a moment. And we did see it last year with Nick Nat, that when he's on the field, he's still scoring really strong for us. Across last year, just those few games that he played, including finals, his time on ground was 56% of an average for those 5 games he played, including finals last year. And yet he's still scoring 70s and 80s in Dream Team and Fantasy and 80s and 90s in Supercoach from just over 56%. In fact, his highest percentage of game time on field last year was 62% in the semi-final loss to Geelong. That's as high as he got. He did come off and hurt himself with an ankle injury. That's why he played those kind of round 15 to 17 stretch and hurt himself, and that is the big concern now around durability. But when he plays, as you've said so well, we know he's going to score. His value, he's got great ceiling, he's got it, but the big question mark is around his durability. Is he going to play enough games to make him a worthwhile selection? I think that's the big question.
Absolutely. So what we can see over his career history from a games played perspective, he's never, except for his second season, he has never played 22 games. So that's 1 in 10 seasons he's been in the AFL.
Yeah.
Entering his 29th, he's like 29 now, so he's going to turn 30 in May. So right around sort of the peak time for Ruckman, you think he's going to have another 1, 2, maybe even 3 really good years left in him, if all goes to plan. So yeah, we're looking at those numbers. If you do select him, and I'm certainly not against that selection, but if you do, you probably have to be banking on the fact that even as a best case scenario, he might miss 3 or 4 games for the season.
Yeah.
So whether we have a playing option on the bench, that might work out. Whether he's a guy that we look to upgrade at some point, and obviously we have a couple of great premium rucks these days that probably need to be brought into every single side in the competition. It's just a difficult one, I mean. But yeah, so he's someone that I look at and I think if he can just play that first 10, 11 games up until the bye, the other annoying issue with him is he does have that round 12 bye.
Yeah.
But if he can just get through to the bye, maybe get a week or two further, he's gonna make you cash, especially in Supercoach. He's has a best case scenario. It wouldn't completely shock me if he was in triple figures.
Yep.
I don't expect him to be there, but that is a possibility. And really, you can see this going one of two ways. Where, look, he gets injured, he's painful. A lot of the people in the competition that had him, he's obviously going to be highly popular. He always is.
Yep.
It's going to be a trade, but in the scenario that he actually goes at triple figures, or perhaps a little bit beyond, and he is going to be popular. He always is, as long as he's fit and firing come round one. Then you're going to be left behind a lot of the competition. So he's going to be a cornerstone of our fantasy seasons in 2020. And making the right decision on him is going to be quite imperative to your success, I believe.
Yeah, I think so too. Look, in terms of how he's fit, again, we said right at the top of the episode, he scores well against everybody. He doesn't come up against them and struggle in the hitouts. He might not get as much around the ground when he comes up to the likes of a Brodie Grundy, for example. But there's enough data to suggest that he's still going to score well for us. When you look at the fixture, again, he's got a really bad one, round 12. If it was round 14, it'd be perfect. But his opening 5 matchups for the year, just from a reference point: Melbourne round 1, St Kilda round 2, Geelong round 3, Port Adelaide round 4, and then Richmond round 5. The only one that's really of any level of concern would be that round 1 matchup against Melbourne. But again, it's not a huge concern for me. The biggest concern is around his durability, but he's a start or a pass, in my opinion. There's enough data to suggest that if you're going to pass on him because he's injury, quote-unquote, prone at the start of the year, those variations and variables are only going to further increase with every game he plays. Therefore, he's a start or a pass for me in the salary cap formats of the game. And it's just ride it for as long as you can, because when he's fit and firing, he's going to score for you.
Yep, not wrong. I think we've said all we need to say on him. He's a great scoring option. He's injury prone. It's going to be a punt. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about his draft selection, because that's one that's clearly going to be a big conundrum for every single fantasy coach.
Yeah, and look, for me, it's very format to format dependent, because his scoring and his style of play is heavily rewarded in the Supercoach scoring as opposed to Dream Team and fantasy. Look, Gawn and Grundy are still widely considered the top 2 rucks again entering to 2020, and you can build a case in all formats that they're first round selections. When Nick Nat goes in, will depend on that format. For AFL Fantasy and Dream Team right now, he's currently ranked outside of the top 20 in rucks. The positive about that is he is going to slide a little bit in people's minds. Again, unless you're in a league where people do heavy research, and maybe you're in one of those, which is well done for you. I do struggle to see how the guys like, Witts, O'Brien, Goldstein, Martin, Lysett, all probably will get picked ahead of him. Tim English, will get some preseason hype as well. But it's probably around then. Sam Jacobs is another who's probably going to get picked ahead of him. But he's probably then in that next batch. Marshall, you should probably throw in that, Mitch. But, when guys like Cruiser, Stanley, Lobb, Darcy, Nankervis, he's probably going to be one of those latter few draft rucks that get picked up. He could be quite great value late in a Dream Team and fantasy draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're taking a calculated risk,
yeah.
But I guess even, with your first selection, you're taking a calculated risk. So everything is a risk. We do have to keep in mind with fantasy that even the most consistent, the most durable players can have an injury-prone season. So keep that in the mind whenever you're making a selection like this. As far as it goes with selection in fantasy, I would be thinking, hey, look, if I can pick him up in maybe the last 8 selections of the draft, that might work out okay, especially if I've looked at R1. I haven't been able to nab any of these really superstar ruckmen, absolutely. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll get this guy on the cheap. I might be able to match him up with someone else that I think might have a better season than what they've had in the past.
Sure.
And say that's going to be potentially a weak line for me. But as a best case scenario, that's quite competitive. And look, I've also taken another premium midfielder, or I've taken another premium forward.
Yeah.
That's how you're going to be looking at that selection. Supercoach becomes more of an interesting one because I suspect that he might get taken a little bit higher up. I don't think he's going to be there. Maybe he's definitely not going to be there in the second half of the draft. So it's just your degree of confidence. You are going to be, if you're selecting him, he is going to be your R1.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit more risk averse on that one because I just think if you take him, you really need to luck in that the R2 actually kind of has a breakout season, or you might be putting 60s and 70s on the ground, which you really don't want to do when you've spent such a valuable selection earlier in the draft. So I would probably be avoiding unless you could kind of get him in the second half of the season, but it's a horses for courses with draft selection, MJ. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, look, I think it's Supercoach. Again, it's a clear top two. You'd probably, again, based off last year's numbers, Goldstein probably has to get ranked in at number 3. And then you can build a case again. He's got a bit more of the injury concerns, which you flagged really well. But you could probably build a case that he does belong in kind of the next grouping, which includes like O'Brien, Witts, Lysette, maybe a Rowan Marshall if you don't think Paddy Ryder's going to impact him. So he does sit in that bunch too. I don't mind it, but again, it's all about what you do with those other selections pre him and how you mitigate the potential risk with either handcuffing him with another West Coast Eagles, whether you pick another additional ruckman, that you believe could also break out or something like that. There's so many different ways and strategies you can play it. You're probably not losing your draft selecting Nick Naitanui in that kind of 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th ruck kind of area selected off the board. You're not losing your draft with that selection, I wouldn't think.
No, you wouldn't think so. I would probably feel a little bit more confident with that selection. Obviously, I'm just trying to mitigate or risk it if there was a better ruck forward available.
Yep.
If you could couple him with someone like that. My only concern with him is that how you take him at, say, your 12, say like round 10, he might be available, maybe even he has to go earlier. And then you say, okay, I've spent a relatively high selection. I'm going to just take someone that's very average as my second ruck. Maybe you couple him with a Vardy.
Yeah.
That could be something that sort of makes a lot of sense because, Nick Nat gets injured, Vardy comes in. We've seen, obviously, Hickey's there as well, so you'd have to be thinking about that. But you think if there's only one guy playing ruck, they're probably going to produce okay scores. But, it is a bit of a risk. But having said that, as a best-case scenario, Nick Nat's one of the best Supercoach rucks out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The risk is, it's a classic risk reward with him. The risk is his durability, that his body could let him down. But we've said that about so many different players for years, and then it doesn't seem to be a factor. So it's got to be about, yes, factor that in, but then make the selection based off what is the right thing for you. Because we've said it again, a lot of times this episode. When he's on the field, he scores. Minimize the risk as best you can, but no, you could get massive value, especially in the Supercoach format. Appreciate your thoughts on Nick Nat, mate.
Perfect, Matt. I'm looking really forward to this 2020 fantasy season now. This is going to be a very interesting ruck conundrum, but they always are, hey?
Yeah, no, we wouldn't prefer it any other way other than this, and appreciate your help. As always, if you want to go and check out the article about Nick Nat or any of the other players revealed so far in the 50 most relevant, you can go and do that at coachespanel.tv. All the links to join our Patreon and help support the Coaches Panel, you can find that there. And depending on the tier level of support, you can get early access to these episodes before anybody else and get yourself ahead of the crowd. We get into the number 46 of the 50 most relevant tomorrow, and I can't wait to chat about him then with you.